Hey, what's up, Mythguardians? Cool Cat here, and we finally have a new patch to play. It's a very exciting patch. I can't wait to go over with you guys. I kind of organized the patch notes a little bit on my monitor over here, so we're gonna have a couple of different types of changes. We're gonna have the really important changes, the changes that are going to warp the metagame from what it used to be. They're typically gonna be nerfs to popular decks and popular cards. And then we have our effective buffs, which are going to, bring some lesser used cards more into the limelight, let them be run a little bit more in some possibly different types of decks. Then we have the possibly effective category, which is something, it was buffed, it was changed, it might end up popping up here and there, but I don't see it making too much of a impact on what we're going to be seeing in the future. And then we have the probably ineffective category, which are buffs or changes that are probably not really going to impact too much of what we were seeing or what we will see in the future. So let's go ahead and we'll start with the most important changes, of course. So let's hop right into it. Alright, so in these categories, I'm not going to list them in order of importance or any kind of order really. I was kind of just scrolling through the patch notes and picking out, what I thought would go in the list and just threw it on there kind of haphazardly. But we're going to start from the top of my list and move on down. For the important changes, we're going to start with this Gnarly Colabuck nerf. It went from a 1/1 to a 0/1 now, so you're not going to be able to kill off your opponent's 1-drop while also ramping into your own 3-drop, or so on like that. So you're not going to be able to run your Colabuck into like a Strogy pup. And that pup will still be alive to swing at your face the next turn. You're not going to be able to run it into your parser recruits or anything like that. All you get is your ramp. You're not going to be getting any sort of value trades or any sort of trades at all from it. So that's going to be a pretty impactful buff, I think, because you are going to be sacrificing your board presence in order to get your ramp going on. So it does give you a little bit of a drawback. One thing to think about here is that it now no longer kills off something like Racer and Shadow. So if you're running purple and Racer is your best chance to get rid of a Gnarly Colabuck, you're not going to be able to grab it back from your boneyard. So that's something to keep in mind because that Racer will banish itself at the end of the turn. And then next up we have Ironbelly Wyvern. It went from a 3/2 with Rush and Teleport to a 3/3 with Swift and Teleport. I personally think Ironbelly Wyvern is still going to be pretty good. Swift and Teleport is an insane combination. I think that this will kind of change a lot of what you're able to run now, because before with the Ironbelly with Rush, that would make 3 health kind of weak, but now there's no 3 attack rush minions. So that makes 2 health kind of a break point for 3 and 4 drops. If you have anything less 2 health or less, it's going to die to the Racer, it's going to die to a Trapezist, and things like that. But if you have a 3 health 3-drop or a 3 health 4-drop, something like Parser Regulars or the Ironbelly Wyvern itself, it's going to be pretty safe against your Racer and Shadows or the Trapezist, so you're going to almost guarantee get to swing with that on the next turn. And I think that's going to have a really good impact on the other changes made in this list. And then moving forward, we have the Wings of Abaddon change. So what they did, it no longer costs a utility action to sacrifice a minion, but it does again cost 1 mana. If you remember, this is what it used to cost before they changed it around October to November, I think, somewhere around there. But so you can sacrifice any amount of minions that you want as long as you have the mana, which could have some really cool shenanigans with something like your Stairway to Hades. You can get a lot of Rush Frenzy minions going on there if you have the mana available. But since it no longer is free, it's going to take 5 mana to get a Wings to swing in to trade to have that wing still on the board. So again, that's really going to impact the amount of health your mid game is able to have, which I think 3 and 4 health around turn 3, 4, and 5 is going to be a pretty safe bet. And then moving forward, we have Shopworn Bull. This is a pretty good nerf. I think it went from 3 mana and 2 red gems to 4 mana and 2 red gems. I think that it's a pretty good spot right now. You know, I didn't think it was like way too strong before, but I think this does kind of even it out a little bit. You're not able to get that engine going as early as you used to be able to, you know, and it will take a little bit of protection since it comes down a little later. You know, it'll be able to get traded into because you'll have a stronger board to be able to kill off that bull, you know, since coming down a turn later. Then the next change to Heaven and Back, they basically got rid of the +1/+1. And so it still, you know, dies, returns to your hand with agile and reduced mana cost, but it no longer gets the +1/+1 buff. I think that's a decent change. I think the main issue with To Heaven and Back is the fact that it doesn't make the minions ephemeral. I know some people disagree with that, but I think, you know, being able to recur those minions from your boneyard with the buff still, you know, with things like Journey of Souls, Shroud the Pit, things like that, 5 Spirit Gates, another one. It makes it maybe a little too strong, but, you know, with the disappearance of Ironbelly Wyvern as a rush minion, I think that kind of brings, you know, To Heaven and Back into a better spot as well, you know, since you're not able to get that value off as immediately. And then the next change, the Xerxian Recruiter went from a 2/3 to a 2/2. So it looks like the Rhino kind of recognizes that 2 health breakpoint that I pointed out before with the Ironbelly Wyvern change. So it's going to be able to get taken down by some rush minions in the early mid game when you drop the Recruiter. So it's I think that's a really good change. Recruiter's always been kind of a mainstay in orange lists, even, you know, in rainbow lists, just because it's a good statted body with the possibility to draw a card. So I think that the 1 less health will make this put this into more of a deck that you would run this in, as opposed to just throwing it into every orange deck that you make. And then the next change, Ingrid Stormdaughter went from 7 mana to 5 mana, but they also reduced the stats from a 5/5 to a 4/3. I think this is a really great change. Typically in Valks, you're not going to want to go above 5 or 6 mana. You know, getting to 7 mana can actually be really difficult because you'll end up burning something that you need to play instead. So this gives Valks a good hand refill. It gives Valks some good staying power against things like Misanthropia, or really any board clear outside of, you know, Giganta Macchio, which banishes the cards, so you're not able to get them back from your boneyard. But this will give Valks more of a mid-game, you know, more of a mid-late game possibility. So I think this is a really great change, which is something that Valks was having a lot of issues with in the past. And then next we have Giganta Macchio, went from 5 mana to 6 mana. I think this is, it's a decent change. Typically you're not going to be playing Gig on 5, and really the only time you would be is to counter the Valks deck once they drop the Road Queen. But I think this is a pretty good change. It'll help you, you know, play it a little later to get a little bit more value from it. Of course, it is a nerf. It costs 1 more mana, so you're not able to gig and drop a 5-drop on 10 mana or something like that. You know, but I think this is definitely a fair change. And then next you have Allfather's Horn. So instead of just banishing that copy of Allfather's Horn, it's going to banish every single copy in your deck. So I think this change isn't going to affect too much. I like that they were able to make this change without it, you know, really affecting the ability to get the the core type of gameplay that they wanted out of the Horn. So now you're not going to be able to Horn and Horn again, which was something that, you know, you were able to do. That was a very strong play, but So now you can horn once, which is typically going to be enough. You know, one horn is usually going to get the job done, but you're not able to get that extra reach with the second horn. So you have to be a little bit more careful when you use your horn, but typically, you know, that one horn is still going to be plenty. So I think this is a really good change. Next we have Ikuturso. It went from a 10-10 to a 9-9. So this is it seems kind of inconsequential, you know, just down +1 or -1/-1, but I think the 9 health is going to be a lot easier to deal with than the 10 health. The 9 health dies to quite a bit more, and usually, you know, at least with me, whenever somebody drops an Ikuturso on the field, it usually lives at about 1 health. You know, so that's really not going to be happening too much anymore, and I think that it's going to be a lot easier to manage an Ikuturso on curve, or even ahead of curve with the Grinning Colabuck. All right, and now on to the effective buffs. These are buffs that are going to bring the cards, you know, into some meta decks. It's really going to help define some archetypes and really bring some different options to the table. So we're going to start with Alacrity. It used to cost 4 mana, it now costs 3 mana, so this is going to be a lot easier to pull off. So this change is going to make it a lot easier to draw into it and then play it with something like your Ichor Feast or possibly a Brainstorm if you're in blue-red. You know, so you're going to be able to draw into that lethal a little bit easier. And then we have the Calliope Muse. It went from a 3-2 to a 3-3, which again, that 3 health breakpoint is going to be extremely important looking into future 3 and 4 drops. You know, so that's definitely something to keep in mind. It still gives you that Divination 3, so it's kind of like a budget Efreet with no drawback. And next we have Decoy. So it went from an 0-2 to a 1-2 that now has Defender and Deadly. So it can no longer attack, so you're not able to break its stealth. It'll have to be broken by the opponent. And when a minion attacks this, it draw a card. It no longer draws that card when it's attacked. So now while it's in stealth, when a friendly minion is attacked, they swap places before the combat. So the enemy minion that swings into the friendly minion is now going to hit this 1-2 with Deadly, so it's pretty much going to die, and then you'll still get to draw a card on Demise. That's still a part of the card, so it kills off a card and then it cycles itself, which I don't know, it's kind of pretty expensive for a 4-drop. I'm not sure if it's going to be run pretty much, you know, in any purple list you see, but it definitely is going to have its uses. Let's see, and next we have God's Blood Transfusion. This is a really, really strong buff. Now instead of giving a minion +2/+2, it's now +3/+3, and that is permanent. It's essentially just like giving a minion a giant stairway and regen 2. So this onto a Thane, like for example, on curve is going to be really hard to deal with outside of something like a direct damage spell or like a vicious cycle or something like that, some sort of hard removal. So I think this is going to push like a more aggressive or mid-range style blue into the meta, which I think a lot of the red-blue rush, the rainbow rush, is going to run this card, or even just some sort of red-blue mid-range might end up popping up due to this change and this next change, Honed Edge. And now instead of giving a minion +2/+1, it now gets +2/+2. So that's going to help with, again, that 2 health breakpoint. You drop this on a Frecky Scout, now it's a 4/3. It's not going to die to a Racer. It's not going to die to the Trapezist. And it's just a really, really strong buff that I think is going to move blue into more of a minion base instead of an enchantment base. And next we have Hacker's Intuition. So this card, this one I kind of looked over a little bit when it first came out, or when I first looked over the change. So now it still gives Agile, and it gives Breach, deal extra damage equal to your opponent's unspent mana. So just 1 mana, give a minion agile is really strong. You can play this on like any rush minion to get that last bit of face damage, and it still deals that extra damage. I know people don't tend to float too much mana in this game, but you know, that's still, any extra damage is going to be effective in an aggro deck. So I can definitely see some sort of green aggressive deck coming into at least some sort of relatively decent play here with a lot of these changes, you know, and I think Hacker's Intuition is going to help push that along quite a bit. And then we have Hysterical Strength. I personally thought this card was pretty good before. I've been gotten by it a couple of times, you know, since due to the way the Mythgard buff system works. The minions will take the extra health as damage as opposed to their base health, so when the buff disappears, that minion's still there. So it gives a minion +2/+2, but it now gives a minion +3/+3 until the end of the turn. And that's still going to cost 1 mana. 1 mana +3/+3. That's going to go really well with Alacrity. That's going to go really well with Hacker's Intuition. That's going to go really well with God's Blood Transfusion, Honed Edge, or any other buff card to really, really push up a card to swing in for that last bit of damage. And then next we have Pack Mentality. This is a change that I've personally wanted for quite a while. Now instead of costing 2 yellow gems, it only costs 1 yellow gem. So it's going to be a lot easier to pull out both on curve, which I'm not sure why you would want to do it on curve, but you're able to splash this card in quite a bit easier to some other more tokeny aggressive style decks than you were able to before. And then next we have Reckless Vulcanus. This one is kind of a wild change. I didn't see this coming. It's now a 3/2, where on demise, it now deals 2 damage to both you and your opponent. So if you're going to be in any sort of red burn style deck, you're going to want to run this card. A 2 mana 3/2, that is pretty much vanilla stats. And then you also get that extra burn damage on demise, which typically, you know, you're not really going to care too much about dealing burn damage to yourself in red because you'll have things like Strogy Pup to heal back up or to get your health to a decent start before you even drop this card. And then being able to trade with that 3 health or 3 attack. As I mentioned before, the 3 health is going to be a really good break point, but the Reckless Vulcanist is one of the only cards, one of the only 2 drops with 3 attack that's really going to be able to break that break point. So that's going to be a very strong place for this card, and then that extra burn at the end is really going to help you finish off some hard games. And then the last effective buff, I think, is going to be the Vodnik Informant. So it went from a 1/2 to a 1/3. Again, I'm bringing up that 3 health break point, and it's also, correct me if I'm wrong, but I believe this is the only 1 mana 1/3 in Mythgard right now. And I think that's going to be extremely helpful to trade into things like a Strogy Pup or you know, your other 2/1 minions, your 2/1 drops. I think Vodnik Informant is going to be in a really great place in green, and you know, being able to see what your opponent's hand is going to be pretty strong as well. You know, letting you know, oh, do I need to play around this certain card, which, you know, typically you'll be able to see, and you won't have to because they won't have it. But keep in mind, it does only reveal what your opponent is holding for that turn. So the future cards they draw, you won't be able to see. You know, so that's something to think about as well. So that's going to be about it for what I believe are the effective changes. So let's move on into the next category. All right, so for the possibly effective changes, we have the Anklebiter. So Anklebiter is now going to be 2/2 instead of a 1/2, and now on breach, instead of just getting 2 attack, it'll get +1/+1. So there's a couple of reasons I don't think this is going to be like extremely effective, or I don't think it belongs in the effective buffs category. The main reason is you typically, again, that 2 health breakpoint on 2 is going to be something that's going to be really hard to manage, with your 2 attack rush minions that are going to be pretty prevalent. So it's going to die to the Trapezist, it's going to die to the Eraser and Shadow, so you're not going to be able to get that breach off. And then it's also really susceptible to the 2 attack 1-drops. If it just gets chumped by a 2 attack 1-drop, then you're going to be down on mana efficiency. So I don't think the Anklebiter is going to be, a very like a meta breaking, meta warping style change. And then next you have Brainstorm. So it went from 3 mana and 2 blue gems to 3 mana and 1 blue gem. So this one might start to see some play. The 2 blue gems was always kind of hard to deal with because you typically need a few blue gems to be able to play most of the good blue cards. And being able to have at least 1 or 2 open blue gems to play what you draw is going to be pretty key. I could see this being run in some sort of mid-range style blue deck along with the different buffs, so that'll leave at least a gem or 2 open for drawn into Honed Edge or God's Blood to buff up your board. And then next we have Cornered Wildcat. So it went from this is just a straight numbers buff. It went from a 3/3 to a 4/4, and then after defending in combat, the minion takes an additional 4 damage as opposed to 3. One thing to consider with this is that it doesn't deal the additional damage until after it defends in combat. So if that 4 attack would have been enough to kill it anyways, then it's kind of a wasted effect. And 4 mana 4/4 is slightly below vanilla stats, and you're typically not really going to be able to trade this up because most of the good higher health minions like Celestial Dragon, like Sapo, they're going to have warded, so you're not going to be able to get that extra 4 damage off. And then next you have Mothmara. It went from a 1/2 to a 2/1, so that's going to take effect with the other 2 attack 1-drops. But one thing I like about this is that it kind of positions Mothmara decks to be more aggressive as opposed to, more defensive, slow burn your opponent with spells. Now it's more about, hey, deal a lot of damage really fast because you have a 2/1 out instead of a 1/2. It still has a lurker, so you don't have to worry. You can really protect this pretty easily. And then next we have Sablewing Zira. It basically just stole the Bald Mountain's old effect. Your spells have their mana cost reduced by 1. So I think that may help this card come into some sort of deck. The biggest reason I don't think it will is Bald Mountain had the ability to recur spells, and then you could play them for their reduced mana cost, and now you need both of these cards out for that same effect. And I don't think Sablewing Zira is going to be strong enough to really be able to utilize that effect itself. And then, on top of that, that 3 green gem requirement is going to make it all but impossible to drop a Zira and then take advantage of that reduced mana cost in the same turn. So you're not really ever going to be able to drop a Zira, then detain something. You're not going to be able to drop a Zira, then let astray something, or drop a Zira and draw some cards or anything like that. And next we have Sand Scout. So instead of needing the Desert Enchantment to grant Swift, it now has Swift innately, and then it just doesn't take the damage while occupying a Desert Enchantment. So this is kind of good. So now it has Swift to be able to get to that Desert Enchantment, so it doesn't take retaliatory damage. That also makes it slightly more effective on its own without the Desert support, since you can kind of dance around the board a little bit. For a 2-drop, I still don't like 2 health on a 2-drop because of, the reasons I've stated previously in this video. That 2 health breakpoint is going to be a very important meta, kind of meta defining point in Mythgard. And next we have Serapis False Apostle. So now instead of dealing 1 damage to you and your opponent, let me double check this and make sure I got it right. Yeah, so now instead of dealing 1 damage to both you and your opponent, it now drains 1 life from your opponent, which means instead of dealing a damage to you, it heals you back up. So that's going to be pretty potent, I think, to give you some sort of healing option in red. And it also still has Lurker and Life Tab, so it's going to be pretty easy to heal back up with this on the board. I don't think that it's going to be strong enough to really be run in any meta red decks. Losing half your life to draw 4 cards seems kind of like a bad ultimate ability. The other ability, the give another minion demise, return to play in the same lane with Ephemeral. You see that in cards like Respawn, and that card is very rarely run. I could see this, if there's a lot of strong enter the battlefield effects, then that might be run with something like Sideshow Chimera. But red doesn't really have a ton of those. So I don't think that Serapis is going to be very effective in this meta. And then next you have Vulcan Brand. So it gives a minion piercing and demise instead of dealing 3 damage. So it now deals 3 damage to you, your opponent, and the minions in the opposing 3 lanes. So it's again more of that cheap burn for your opponent. It also has the ability to open up some lanes for some more attacks. But with the loss of Ironbelly, then I don't think that you'll really make much use of this. It's not really that effective, I don't think. That extra burn is going to come in handy for sure, but I'm not sure if you're going to run this in too many decks. And now the probably ineffective category. I don't think that these cards are really going to see any play based on these changes. You have the Triassic Kraken. That's just the straight numbers buff, went from a 6/6 to a 7/7. I don't think blue is going to be running too many big guys. With the ability to make their small guys big, I don't think that they'll really care too much about making their big guys bigger. And I think it's going to move more into a more aggressive, quick mid-range style meta, and I don't think you're going to want to spend all of your mana on a just 1/7/7 body that's really easily chump blocked or just kind of danced around, which you can't really dance around it, I guess. You can play around it since it does give all minions immobile, but you can definitely just chump block it and ignore it for the rest of the game. And then, see, you have Stray Panacea. It went from an 0/2 to an 0/1, and now on Demise, instead of gaining 6 life, you now gain 4 life and draw a card. I don't think you're going to want to play an 0/1, especially in any sort of red deck. Red deck is going to be pretty aggressive, as usual. There could definitely see some control red coming out, but I don't think that this Stray Panacea is going to be run in pretty much anything. You still lose 2 life on Awaken, and I don't know. I don't think a 1 mana 0 power card is going to be quite good enough when you have something like Strogy Pup or even Iron Flesh Performer. And next you have Sea Lords Trident. And so this is another just straight numbers buff. Now that 4/2 Fell Kraken is going to cost 2 mana as opposed to 3. I don't think that that's good enough. Sea Lords Trident, it's, let me double check the numbers on this bad boy. It's a relatively hefty enchantment at 4 4 health, you know, but the fact that you are only able to make that 4/2 if you already don't have another 4/2, I think that's really the thing that's going to be hindering this this card. You know, you're not going to be able to flood the board with some 4/2s. You know, you're not really going to be able to get too much value out of it. It is going to have some potency in like guaranteed jumpers, but I don't think that there's going to be a red deck that pops up that's going to run this card. Next, you have Ravine Guardian. So it went from a 1/3 to a 1/4, and it now only gets +2 attack and defender during your opponent's turn as opposed to +3 attack. So they essentially changed it from a 4/3 to a 3/4 on your opponent's turn. I don't think that this is going to be run. It wasn't paying 2 mana for a 1 power minion is typically not going to be something that you'll want to do, especially something that doesn't impact the board immediately. It's going to be decent for defending your other minions since it does have defender on your opponent's turn, but I don't think that you're really going to want to do that when you could just play something like a Thane instead. And then next we have the Magpire Enforcer. It's just again another straight numbers buff. It went from a 2/2 to a 3/3. I still don't think that this is going to be good enough to run. It's pretty much just a ball of stats and keywords that I don't think you're going to want to run in yellow. Typically you don't go to yellow for their 4-drops, and I don't think this is going to change that. You know, really the only decent 4-drops in yellow or like a Llama Ring, Model, occasionally Enchant Eater in the right meta. You know, so you're pretty much just like, I just don't think this change is going to do too much. Then you have Lavish Proxy. It went from a 4/9 to a 2/9, which is again more emphasis on that 2 health breakpoint. It's able to kill those 2 health minions. I know I switch between 2 and 3 health breakpoint depending on the context, but you know, you generally want minions 3 health and above, and you don't want them 2 health and below. I don't think this is going to change too much. You know, you still play Lavish Proxy so you don't die that turn. And I don't think that extra 2 attack is going to affect that very much. You know, it's not going to be able to kill those 4 health guys. You're not going to get as much value out of the body, but you're not playing Lavish Proxy for the body. And then next we have Jotun Shadowfist. Now instead of +2/+0, it now gets +3/+0 after each time it takes damage. I don't think that that's going to be too effective. You know, you typically didn't run it before, mostly because it was a big guy that didn't impact the board whatsoever. You typically, you know, when you're paying more than 4 or 5 mana for a card, you're going to want some immediate value so that you don't just get robbed and get hard removal or anything like that. You know, so that's something to keep in mind. It's just like a big dumb ball of stats that doesn't really give you any sort of impact immediately. And then next we have Shortsong. They basically gave an additional ability to this card. So instead of just returning an enchantment to your opponent's hand and drawing a card, you can now return an enchantment from your boneyard to your hand, which is it's decent. One thing to think about, you can't return an enchantment from your boneyard to your hand and draw a card. You know, so it's just one or the other strictly. I don't think this is good enough to be run. I'm not seeing too many enchantments moving into the next meta, especially not any that you're fine with just returning to the hand. All of the enchantments that I can see coming out are going to be in some sort of Rainbow Rush, which is going to be some cheap enchantments that the opponent's just going to be able to easily play again. You know, and then being able to return an enchantment from your boneyard. Enchantments typically don't go to boneyards, you know, so I don't think that ability is going to be very strong. And then next you have Hellself moving from a 1/2 to a 2/1, kind of cementing that aggressive ping to win strategy, giving you that additional damage to swing face. Hellself still has Lurker, so it's still easy to protect, but I think the ability here on Hellself isn't going to be strong enough when you compare it to something like Mothmara. I know they're not the same, but they're both ping type abilities. So basically your opponent just has to, oh, well, I'm gonna attack with everything every turn, and I'm just gonna end up killing myself due to your Hellself. That's typically not something your opponent's gonna fall for. They're gonna find a way to deal that 1 damage to the Hellself, and they're just going to kill it off. If they can't and you're able to protect the Hellself for the entire game, then I guess you kind of deserve that win, but that's not going to be something that happens, and it's not going to be a reliable thing to bank on as far as like a solid game plan goes. And then next you have the Garden of Irie. I'm not sure if this changed. It went from 2 mana and 2 green gems to 2 mana and 1 green gem. I still don't think it's going to be good enough to play. Increasing the mana cost by 2 is a lot, as well as the enchantment itself costing 2. I don't think that there's going to be many cards that you want to play bad enough again to play it on the Garden. And then last but not least, we have a buff to Foresight. That's right, the power Foresight. Now instead of Divination 2, it now gives you Divination 3. I don't think this is good enough to be run as a power. You know, all of pretty much any time that you would want some sort of divination, there's usually just a better card and a better power to use instead alongside that card. It might see some play with some slower rainbow decks, but typically rainbow decks are going to be a little bit quicker because rainbow is a great way to be able to get the card advantage on your opponent so you can get the mana to play all of your cards. That's a completely different story there, but I don't see Foresight seeing much play even after this buff. There's just really not too much of a reason to run that as opposed to a more impactful power that actually impacts the board. And due to the lane system, being able to impact the board is a lot more important than being able to fix your draws. So that is my thoughts on the Mythgard patch. I'm really excited to dive into this patch and really see what's good, what's not. So remember to like the video if you like the thoughts. Make sure you subscribe to my channel for more Mythgard content. Leave a comment down below. You know, what do you think? Do you agree with me? Was I wrong on something? Why was I wrong? But as always, GG for Matt.